Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Define Disaster. This is Battlefield 4, and in today's weapon showdown, we're going to be taking a closer look at all available burst fire weapons in the game with the aim of finding out which one of them is best suited for the variety of game modes and engagement distances you will find in Battlefield 4. Now, first things first, I'd like to thank MXITube and Bombatron for suggesting this video, or more specifically, requesting a review on the M4 carbine, one of the weapons we're going to be covering today. Speaking of which weapons we're going to be covering today, it's going to be the M16A4, the M4, and the AN94, and we're going to be taking a close look at each weapon in specific before going over what attachments to use, what strategies, and last but not least, of course, which is the best of all of them. If you're only interested in one of the weapons we'll be discussing today or one part of this video, feel free to skip ahead here. You'll find linked all the different parts of this video. For mobile users, you may want to check the description for timestamps. But without all that being said, now let's get into the first weapon we're going to be looking at today, the M16A4. With the M16A4 being an assault rifle, comes as no surprise that it has a standard assault rifle damage model with a maximum damage of 24.5 and a minimum damage of 18. The fire rate, the burst fire rate of the M16A4 at 800 rounds per minute is amongst the highest we'll be talking about today. But to clarify, this burst fire rate can technically actually be achieved if you perfectly burst the M16A4, and there is no delay between the last bullet leaving your gun of a certain burst and you being able to pull your trigger. This is not the same for all the weapons we'll be looking at today, and I'll get down to what exactly I mean when we arrive at the weapon that has this certain attribute. But what it means is, if you perfectly burst the M16A4, you can burst it at 800 rounds per minute, each burst consisting of 3 bullets. Moving on then to the reload times of the M16A4, very competitive stuff here with a short reload at 1.8 seconds, blazing fast, better than the M416, one of the guns I love so much for the quick reload, so it definitely helps in close quarter. It's definitely always a nice attribute to have on a gun, a very fast reload. And this also goes for the long reload of the M16A4 at 2.3 seconds, 2.37 seconds to be precise. Very competitive, very good. Means you can also go through your whole mag if you have to without having to worry that you're going to be stuck in a reload animation for the next 2.5 games. When it comes to recoil, this is relatively unsurprising. There's a little bit of recoil, but nothing too hefty. 0.28 degrees vertical recoil is something that can be a little bit of a pain, but we'll get into how to correctly burst fire a weapon later on anyway, and we'll be talking about what recoil means for burst fire weapons there in just a little bit. Recoil to the left at 1.17 and to the right at 0.28 means there is a little bit of horizontal recoil to consider. It's going to stop you being extremely accurate at longer ranges, and it's going to mean you're going to have to slightly correct the weapon because it will not only pull upwards but also slightly to the right. Now, the first shot recoil multiplier on the M16A4 is kind of in the middle ground of what we'll be looking at today at 2.3. It's definitely not the best, but not the worst. But probably, given that we're talking about burst fire weapons, you're going to want to try and compensate for it later on with something like an angled foregrip. Moving on then to the accuracy, last but not least, here we have a standard assault rifle accuracy at 0.2, that is for aiming down sight while standing still. If you're standing, moving, and hip firing, you've got a standard 3.5 hip fire accuracy value as with most assault rifles. Nothing to write home about, but certainly plentiful for close quarter situations. The next gun we'll be talking about today is the M4. It's almost a clone to the M16A4 with only a few small differences, but nevertheless, let's go over the stats, given that the M4, of course, is equipable for any class in Battlefield 4 versus the M16A4, of course, being an assault rifle and therefore a medic class exclusive. With a maximum damage of 24 and a 15.4 minimum damage, we have nothing surprising here for a carbine. A rate of fire identical to the M16A4 at 800 rounds per minute for your burst. Once more, this burst can be achieved if you perfectly burst the weapon. There is no forced time or break between the last bullet of one of your bursts leaving the gun and you being able to once more pull the trigger for the next burst. The bursts, as with the M16A4, are going to be 3-shot bursts, so you're going to be doing 3 bullets out of your mag, out of your gun every time you pull that trigger. When it comes to reload times, once more almost identical to the M16A4, slightly worse with a short reload at 1.85 seconds. Still amazing, nothing that really makes a difference or is in any way worse than the 1.8 of the M16A4, and the same goes for the long reload at 2.4 seconds versus the M16A4's 2.37. Fantastic reload times, nothing to complain about. The recoil of the M4 is identical to the M16A4, 0.28 vertical, 0.17 to the left, and 0.28 to the right. This gun, like the M16A4, does have a little bit of kick to it, will pull slightly to the right, maybe not great for extremely long ranges because of that quite noticeable, not hefty, but noticeable horizontal recoil. You should be paying attention to it. The first shot recoil multiplier is slightly higher with the M4 than the M16A4, but only by 0.1 at a total of 2.4. So once more, this is pretty much the same as the M16A4. The accuracy of the M4 as carbine is very different though than the M16A4 with a ADS aiming dial sight while not moving value of 0.3. It's significantly worse than the M16A4. However, in most situations I was using these guns effectively, and we'll get into what situations those are in just a little bit. I wasn't finding too much difficulty with the accuracy of the M4 versus the M16A4. What the M4 does have going for it though when it comes to accuracy is its hip fire accuracy. That's hip firing while standing and moving simultaneously at 2.5 versus the M16A4s and AN94s 3.5. This is going to help you out in close quarter to close quarter medium range a little bit more. However, as I said before, well, hip fire is still hip fire, and it's not, unless you're using a PDW, your primary way of engaging targets. Now, last but not least, in our weapon comparison today, we have the AN94. Now, this weapon is very different to the M16A4 and its twin brother, the M4. However, let's start off with the stats. It's a standard damage model here for an assault rifle with a maximum damage of 24.5 and a minimum damage of 18. It's got a rate of fire of 600 rounds per minute when using it in fully automatic mode. You can, unlike the M4 and M16A4, use this weapon like any other weapon in the game. However, its burst fire mode is of course the more effective choice no matter how you take it. Its rate of fire of its burst is 1,200. That's 1,200 rounds per minute. However, this is a little bit of a lie. The actual fire rate of the AN94 that you can maximally achieve is actually roughly around 706 rounds per minute. And the reason for this is that there is a forced time you cannot pull the trigger with the AN94 after your burst has been fired. Unlike with the previous weapons, the M16A4 and M4, where once the last bullet of your burst leaves the gun, you can immediately, technically at least, pull the trigger for your next burst, technically achieving a constant fire rate of 800 rounds per minute. The same cannot be said for the AN94. Yes, the 2 shots versus the 3 of the M4 and M16A4, but the 2 shots with the AN94 that its burst may come out with at 1,200 rounds per minute, but before you can fire the next burst at 1,200 rounds per minute, you have to at least wait for 0.12 seconds. This makes the gun very different to its competitors, and we'll be talking about the role of the AN94 versus the M16A4 in just a little bit. But just to clarify these things, when somebody tells you they've got an AN94 that can burst at a fire rate of 1,200 rounds per minute, they are wrong. Yes, the first 2 shots or the 2-shot burst will be coming out at a fire rate at 1,200 rounds per minute if you would just be measuring that burst. Otherwise, however, you can roughly estimate the AN94 in its most effective burst firing mode to be firing at around 700 rounds per minute. The magazine size, like with the M4 and M16A4, is a standard 30+1, 31 bullets. The reload times are across the board worse than the competition, with a short reload at 2.4 seconds, which is still bearable, nothing too shabby there. Of course, much worse than the competition, but amongst just general assault rifle stats, it's alright. The 3.5 seconds for the long reload, however, are a tough bullet to bite, and you're going to want to try avoid reloading it with no bullets left in the mag or chamber, because that's just going to hurt your performance overall. The recoil of the AN94 is relatively interesting. With a vertical recoil at 0.32 degrees per shot, it's minimally higher than the competition, but it's in the same ballpark, kind of a medium-ish amount of recoil to deal with. However, the horizontal recoil, that is recoil to the left and right, is extremely low at 0.1 and 0.12 degrees, that is to the left and to the right. There is close to 0 horizontal recoil, especially when considering that these values are so close together, it basically cancels each other out. Furthermore, the first shot recoil multiplier of the AN94 at 2.1 is a step below the M4 and M16A4. It's something you may be able to notice if you pay attention to it. It's certainly nice given that we're talking about a burst fire weapon where you're going to be experiencing the first shot recoil multiplier either every 3 or every 2 shots fired. The accuracy of the AN-94, standard for an assault rifle with an ADS value of 0.2, that's aiming down sight while standing still, and a hipfire value, that's hip firing while moving around and standing, at 3.5. Nothing to write home about here, normal, what we would expect from any assault rifle. So with the guns being covered, let's talk about, first of all, what you should be using as attachments for these burst fire weapons. When it comes to your choice of sight, it's going to be a matter of personal preference. For me, it's going to be a red dot sight, given that this is, of course, a weapon that I'm going to use at close to medium range, maybe occasionally long range, but nevertheless, a higher magnification optic is not something I would enjoy on any of these guns. However, if you want to use one, these guns are more suited than some of the other assault rifles out there for something like a 3.4 or 4 times magnified optic. Accessory is going to be the laser sight, as with most guns. Turn it off if you get into a smoky situations. Otherwise, enjoy the better hip fire in close quarter combat. When it comes to barrel attachments, if you're going into a lot of close quarter, you're going to a TDM situation, maybe a rush with a lot of close quarter, you want to stay off the minimap, suppressor is going to be your choice. Otherwise, you don't really need a barrel attachment on any of these. You may want to slap on a compensator for the M16A4 and M4 if you're finding that you're having difficulties with the horizontal recoil, or you're maybe just trying to even more extend the range of these guns to something more long range. You can try out the compensator. It works. It doesn't work wonders, however, given that the, of course, vertical recoil, the horizontal recoil, excuse me, is not too high. Underbarrel, for me, is not really a matter of discussion. You're burst firing this weapon. You're going to be experiencing your first shot recoil consistently. That is every 2 or 3 bullets you fire. Therefore, no matter how low the first shot recoil multiplier is, in which case these guns, it actually isn't that low, it's going to be the angled foregrip to further reduce that and help you be more accurate. This is a lot more beneficial to recoil control than something like a muzzle brake would be, especially when we're talking about burst firing weapons. Now, having talked about all of these guns in a little more detail, let's talk about how they perform and how to use them. First and foremost, let's get something out of the way. The M16A4 and the M4 are basically the identical gun. Yes, one of them is a carbine and has the carbine attributes to it. One of them is an assault rifle and therefore is slightly inherently better, but they are basically the same gun. The reason the M4 is in the game is so that everybody can use the M16A4 no matter which class they equip. Because of course, the M16A4 as assault rifle is an exclusive to the medic class. So for the sake of this weapon showdown, I'm going to be really only talking about the M16A4 versus the AN-94, because everything that I say about the M16A4 is equally true for the M4. Now, talking then about this M16A4, it's good at medium range combat. That's where it's the strongest. It can cope with longer range combat, however in my opinion isn't the best suited for it, and it's excellent at close quarter combat as well. Important to note here is you need to have trigger discipline. With the M16A4, it's easy to jam the gun up. That is, pressing down your trigger button too fast and therefore not actually firing any burst, because you're still kind of recuperating from the burst, or you're already fired your burst and the burst is still being fired, and thus not firing one, meaning you're going to have a gap between you actually then once more re-engage your trigger mechanism. This can get you killed in close quarter, and you'll see me jamming up the M16A4, M4, and even the AN-94 quite frequently in clips today. It was only after I took a little bit of time, went to the testing range, and actually tried to burst fire these weapons as effectively as possible, get a feel for how frequently you have to hit down mouse button 1 or whatever your trigger mechanism is to actually burst fire them correctly. So if you want to learn any burst fire weapon, take some time to get to know the weapon, much more than you would with anything semi-automatic. Learn the burst fire and then have the discipline to, even in close quarter spam fire situations, consistently pull through your burst fire. Otherwise, you're not going to have any fun with the M16A4, the M4, or even the AN-94. But speaking of the AN-94, if I would have to recommend a gun of the 3 we're talking about today to choose to start learning how to burst fire correctly, it would be the AN-94. It is frankly easier to use, and the reason for it is A, it's mostly for medium to long range combat, meaning you're not often in close quarter. It is capable of close quarter, but it's certainly better at medium to long range, which means you've got less of a time pressure. You're not usually engaging targets that are going to immediately drop you if you fail to kill them. You can usually just duck behind cover if you kind of screw up your firing mechanism, A. B, given that it's only a 2-shot burst, you can spam your mouse button a lot more. You fire the gun much more frequently than you do the M16A4 and M4. And this may sound silly. Well, so I have to spam the mouse button even more precisely. No, you actually don't. Because you can spam it so much, it is actually hard to jam up the AN-94. It's possible, but it's very difficult. So learning controlled trigger mechanism is easier on the AN94 because it doesn't punish you as much for screwing it up. If you burst a little bit too quickly, it's actually probably just going to not matter at all, and you will occasionally jam it up, but if you do, the jamming time is going to be less because of course your jamming time is a maximum of 2 bullets versus 3 bullets for the M16A4 or M4. So it's an easier learning experience. That's not to say, however, it is the better gun. Now, trying to compare the M4 or the M16A4 and the AN94 is kind of a little bit messed up. It's like trying to compare something like the AR-160 or maybe even the SAR-21 to something more in the direction of an ACE-23 or maybe even an F2000, because those are the roles that these guns represent. The M16A4 is a close quarter to medium range with capabilities at long range, sounds a lot like an ACE-23, and the AN94 is something, yes, it can do out damage in close quarter, better than maybe a SAR-21, but it best shines at longer ranges where it can put these two shots that are very closely behind each other right into your enemy's head, dealing massive damage at all ranges, and its high precision allows it to be so effective at range, which is something that doesn't really benefit it too much in close quarter combat. So if it were to use which is the best burst weapon in the game, frankly it depends on your situation. The M16A4 or M4 are for close to medium range combat. You can use them at longer range if you must. The AN94 is a little bit more flexible than the M16 and M4, but it will be beat out, flat out by the M16A4 and M4 in close quarter combat. It's long distance where it will truly shine. The easier of the guns to use is the AN94. So if you're not familiar with burst fire weapons yet and you want to get to know them, you want to get good with them, take the AN94 for a spin, but be prepared to sink in quite a few hours just to learn to correctly burst fire a weapon. Furthermore, you have to learn to target correctly. That is target acquisition, target maintenance of moving targets while bursting is very different from then just automatically firing, because once more, instead of just one movement on your mouse, holding down mouse button 1 while dragging your mouse to both control recoil and keep your crosshairs on target, you have the additional movement of your index finger that has to regularly at stable intervals and not too quickly, otherwise you're going to jam up your gun, click mouse button 1, fire the weapon instead of just holding it down. So let me know what you think about my analysis on these burst fire weapons. It took me quite a lot of time to put this together because I first had to kind of sink myself into the burst fire mechanism and learn how these guns really work, how to most effectively use them. And I think I know at least now how these weapons are meant to work, but frankly, I am still no expert with them. Maybe some of you guys are out there and you're able to kind of give some more deep insight into the workings of burst fire weapons in Battlefield 4. Feel free to leave that down below in the comments. I'd love to hear about your experiences with the M16A4, M4, or AN94. Furthermore, if you have any video suggestions or general comments, as per usual, the comment box down below is there for you to let me know about what's on your mind regarding Battlefield. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next Battlefield 4 video.